The pilot cutter Small Mercy was 11 meters of patched hull, a cracked reaction plant, and one very good ear. And Isa Verren was the ear. She lay in the listening cradle in the nose of the boat with her cheek against the cold curve of the hull and her eyes closed, because eyes were no use out here and had not been for the last hour. Around her, tucked into recesses along the cutter's spine, 41 whiskers trailed in the dark. They were nothing much to look at, just meter-long filaments of drawn nickel iron strung on ceramic posts, the sort of thing a competent machinist could turn out by the crate. They did not scan. They did not sweep. They simply hung there in the vacuum and shivered when the vacuum shivered, and every shiver went down a hair-fine line into a spark plate, and out of the spark plate came a sound. The sound tonight was wrong. "Say it," said Pilot Master Sefa Ahmadi from the helm bench behind her. Ahmadi was 66 years old, built like a bundle of rope, and had been reading the Reach since before Isa's parents had met. "Don't feel it at me. Say it." "The draw's shutting early," Isa said. "How early?" 40 minutes, maybe 50. "Why?" That was always the hard part. Isa could hear it the way you could hear a kettle about to boil, a change in the grain of the hiss, and hearing was easy. Naming was hard. She kept her eyes shut and listened. Under the general wash of the scatter, that endless soft static of a billion pieces of a dead world grinding against each other, there was a low note that had been steady all shift and was not steady now. It had begun to beat, slow and fat, like two singers a quarter tone apart. "Bellows is early," she said. "It's fields coming up early. It's not the draw that's shifted, it's the count. The whole count's running fast." "How fast?" 19 hours and 4 minutes. It should be 1912. 8 minutes. Ahmadi's voice did not change. 8 minutes over a 19-hour breath. "Do you know how much of the sky that moves?" "About 9,000 kilometers at the sill," Isa said. "Which is why the draw's shutting early, which is why we have 40 minutes to get that idiot out." Behind her she heard the old woman's hands moving on the board unhurried. "Good," said Ahmadi. "That's the whole job. Everything else is plumbing." The idiot in question was a bulk hauler called Verity Dane, 60,000 tons of ore in a hull that had been old when Isa was born, and she was sitting dead in the middle of the draw with a fried steering bus, and a skipper who had not wanted to pay for a pilot. Nobody had to pay for a pilot. The Reach pilot service was free, funded out of the docking levy, because 4 generations ago somebody with sense had worked out that charging for pilotage meant people would skip it, and people skipping it meant people dying, and people dying was expensive in ways that did not fit on a ledger. It was still free. Skippers still skipped it. Some of them thought a pilot was an insult. Some of them just did not like a stranger on their bridge. The Verity Dane skipper had said on the record that he had run the draw 90 times and could run it in his sleep. He had run it 90 times in the slack season, when Kettle was quiet. It was not the slack season. Small Mercy came up on the hauler at a sedate 200 meters a second, which felt like crawling, and was in fact the fastest thing moving in that volume by a factor of 10. Isa opened her eyes for the approach and did not like what she saw, which was nothing at all. That was the thing outsiders never believed about the scatter. It was not a wall of tumbling boulders with dramatic gaps. It was mostly empty. You could fly 100,000 kilometers through the thick of it and see, with your eyes, precisely one object, and it would be a pebble, and you would not see it, because it would be doing 11 kilometers a second and it would already be through you. The scatter was what was left of a planet the humans called the Sill, which had come apart 400 million years ago for reasons nobody had ever fully settled, and it did not orbit Kettle in a tidy ring. It orbited in a broad, processing, 3-braided torus that the gas giant Bellows shepherded and stirred and periodically flung about, and the pieces ranged from mountains you could chart to grit you could not. You did not fly through the scatter by dodging. You flew through it by knowing where it was going to be, which meant knowing the count. The 19-hour breath of Bellows' magnetic field which drove the sheets, which drove the fine stuff, which drove everything. You could not radar the fine stuff. There was too much of it, and it was too small, and it was too fast. You could only listen to what it was doing somewhere else and infer what it was about to do here. Humans had been doing that for 210 years. They had gotten good at it, in the way that people get good at a thing when the alternative is that their children die. Verity Dane, this is Pilot Small Mercy, Amati said. We're coming alongside on your dorsal. Kill your attitude jets, all of them now, and do not touch them again. Acknowledge. A pause, then a man's voice tight as a wire. Pilot, we've got attitude. It's just the main bus. Kill the jets, Dane. We'll tumble. Yes, said Amati. You'll tumble. Tumbling is fine. I can take a tumbling ship. What I cannot take is a ship squirting hot gas into a sheer front 30 minutes before a clap. Kill them. There was a silence of maybe 4 seconds, and Isa found that she had stopped breathing. And then the Verity Dane's jets went dark and the great ugly hull began, very slowly, to roll. Thank you, said Amati, and to Isa without any change of tone, tell me about the front. Isa put her cheek back on the hull. The beat under the hiss had gotten fatter. Somewhere sunward, 17 light minutes away, Kettle had thrown a mass of its own atmosphere into the dark 11 hours ago, and that mass had arrived at Bellows about 40 minutes back, and Bellows Field had taken the hit and rung like a struck bell, and now the ring was coming out through the scatter as a current sheet, a moving surface of charged plasma and squeezed field lines, thin as paper, wide as a world. It would not smash the Verity Dane. It would do something far more banal. It would sweep across 60,000 tons of conductive hull and induce a current in it, and that current would find every ungrounded run of cable in the ship and cook it. And then the ship would be a rock with people inside, and the shot front riding the sheet's leading edge would arrive 9 minutes later and start taking the rock apart at 100 grams at a time. Sheets at 26 minutes, Isa said. Shots at 35, it's a good clap, not a great one. Define good. Enough to kill their bus for good, not enough to kill ours. Because we're 11 meters and they're 400, Isa said, and induction goes with the area you give it. There it is, said Amati. Hook them. The hooking took 9 minutes, which was 6 minutes longer than it should have taken, because the Verity Dane's dorsal fittings were fouled with 60 years of paint, and one of her crew, panicking, tried to help and had to be talked back inside. Isa did the talking because Amati was flying. She had a good voice for it. She had learned that in her first year, that the voice mattered more than the words, that a slow, flat, friendly voice would get a frightened man back through a hatch when shouting only nailed him to the hull. At 19 minutes to the sheet, Small Mercy had the hauler on a hard tow, and the two of them, the cutter and the mountain, began to move. They did not go the short way out. The short way out was 31,000 kilometers, and it was straight, and it was, at that moment, the worst place in the system to be. Amati took them the long way, down and inward, into the shadow of a chunk of the old Sills mantle that the charts called Grand, and everybody called the barn. 4 kilometers of nickel and rock that would take the sheet on its own body and leave a wake behind it. A pocket of quiet maybe 200 kilometers long that would last about 90 seconds. 90 seconds was plenty. You only needed to be somewhere else while the worst of it went past. They made the barn's lee with 4 minutes to spare, and Amati shut everything down, and Small Mercy and the Verity Dane hung there in the dark in the shadow of a dead world's bone and waited. Isa watched the numbers. The sheet came across the barn and the barn lit up. Not visibly. On the plates, in the whisker song, in the hair on Isa's arms. The whole 4-kilometer mass of it flushed with induced current and threw a wake of tangled field behind it. And inside that wake, 2 ships sat with their bellies to the rock and their systems cold, and the wave went over them the way a wave goes over a stone. Then the shot came. Isa heard it as a sound like sand thrown against a window, far away, the barn taking a few million impacts on its sunward face and not caring. And then it was quiet, and the count rolled on, and the draw would be shut for the next 11 hours, and the Verity Dane's crew was alive. Small mercy, Verity Dane. The skipper's voice was different now, smaller. I don't thank you, put it on my levy, put it all on my levy. It's free, said Amati. It was free yesterday too. She closed the channel. She sat back. And then, only then, when nobody could hear her but Isa, the old woman let out a long breath and rubbed both hands down her face, and for a moment she looked exactly as old as she was. 8 minutes, she said. 8 minutes on the count, and a man nearly killed 9 people for the price of a phone call. He'll take a pilot next time, Isa said. He will, Amati lowered her hands. It's the ones who won't that I lose sleep over. Small Mercy came home to Ferry Station 11 hours later with a hauler on her hip and a 19-year-old asleep in the listening cradle with her cheek on the hull, which was, Amati would say later at the inquiry, exactly where the girl had been for most of her life. Ferry Station had 412,000 people in it and looked, from outside, like a stack of tin somebody had welded together in a hurry and then kept welding for 2 centuries. This was more or less accurate. Humans had come to the Halloran Reach 210 years ago in ships that could not go any further, because Kettle was the last star in that stretch of the arm with anything you could eat, and they had found a system that was rich and beautiful and actively trying to kill them, and they had stayed, because there had been nowhere else to go. The first 40 years had cost them 9,000 dead. The 40 after that had cost them 1,100. The last 40 had cost them 31, and every single one of those 31 names was cut into the wall of the pilot hall by the main lock, where you had to walk past them to go to work. Isa walked past them every day. She knew all of them. 3 of them were people who had been on rescue runs. The Reach had no navy. It had no orbital fortresses, no missile platforms, no dreadnoughts, nothing that any outside observer would have recognized as force. It had 600,000 people spread across 4 habitats and 11 rocks. It had a foundry, a farm belt, a very good school, and 240 pilot cutters, none of them longer than 15 meters, all of them named things like Patience and Long Odds and Good Enough and Mudlark, because a pilot who named his boat something grand was a pilot who had not been doing it long. It had, in other words, absolutely nothing that would make anybody afraid. The Ascendancy arrived on a Tuesday. Isa was in the hall when the bell rang. That was the actual name for it, and there was an actual bell, a meter of bronze cast from the hull plate of the first ship that ever made the Reach, and when the marker buoy 40 million kilometers out on the ecliptic detected an inbound transit, some old and stubborn piece of wiring made that bronze ring, and everybody in the pilot hall stopped talking. The board lit. Isa read it over Amati's shoulder and did not at first believe it. One hull, 940 meters. Mass reading that had to be wrong, because it said the thing massed more than Ferry Station. Coming in at a velocity that meant it had crossed from wherever it had come from in, about 1/10 of the time, anybody in the Reach could have managed it, and shedding that velocity with a break burn that lit the marker's optics like a second sun. Well, said Amati quietly, there they are. Isa had known, distantly, the way you know a fact from school, that there were other people out there. Everybody knew. The Reach's telescopes had been picking up traffic in the deep lanes for 60 years, tight coherent beams and drive flares of a kind nobody in the Reach could build. There was an arm's worth of civilization out past the cordon, and it had never once come to Kettle, because Kettle was a nasty little star with a broken planet and nothing anybody wanted. Apparently something had changed. The hail came in 90 minutes later, in accented but flawless human standard, on the marker's own frequency, which meant they had been listening long enough to learn the language and the protocol both. Halloran Reach installations. This is the Ascendancy Survey Vessel Meridian Compass, Surveyor Prefect Ammon Drell commanding. This vessel operates under the authority of the Vessarine Ascendancy, We are conducting a lawful survey of this system under the Ascendancy's Charter of Exploration. We do not require assistance. We do not require permission. We will transit inbound to the fourth body and hold. You will not interfere." Amadi took the handset herself. Isa watched her do it, and watched her think for a second first, which was itself notable, because Amadi never thought before talking on the radio. The whole discipline was to have already thought. "Meridian Compass, this is Ferry Station Pilot Service, Pilot Master Amadi. Welcome to the Reach. We're not going to interfere with anything. We are going to tell you 3 things and then we'll let you be. 1. This system is not navigable on a chart. Not on ours, not on yours, not on anybody's. The debris field between you and the fourth body moves on a 19-hour cycle driven by the gas giant's magnetosphere, and the cycle drifts. If you plot a course today and fly it tomorrow, the course is wrong. 2. Under the Reach Compact, pilotage is free to all vessels, always, no exceptions, no charge, no conditions. I have a boat and a pilot ready to launch now. We'll come out to you. Your bridge, your ship, your command, the pilot only talks. Any master here will tell you it's the cheapest thing in the Reach. 3. If you decline pilotage, that's your right and we'll respect it, and we'll keep the channel open anyway, and we'll keep telling you what we see, and if the day comes that you need us, we will come and get you and it will still be free. That's not a threat and it's not a favor. It's just how it works out here. Compass, do you want a pilot? We can be alongside in 6 hours. The reply took 11 minutes, which was 10 minutes of light lag, and 1 minute of somebody deciding it was not worth more than 1 minute. Ferry Station Pilot Service, Meridian Compass, negative. The Ascendancy does not embark foreign nationals upon the bridges of its vessels. This vessel's navigational suite has surveyed 900 systems, including 31 with debris densities exceeding this one by 2 orders of magnitude. We have your system modeled. Your offer is noted and declined. For the record and for your own understanding, we are aware of your circumstances here. 600,000 persons, no fleet, no shipyard capable of a hull over 20 meters, an economy that would not fund a single one of our escorts for a year. We do not say this to insult you. We say it so that you understand the difference in our positions, and do not mistake courtesy for negotiation. You have offered us a guide through our own transit. We decline, as a captain declines a child's offer to carry his bag. Compass out. The hall was very quiet. Somebody near the back laughed, one short ugly bark, and stopped when nobody joined in. Isa looked at Amadi. Amadi was not angry. That was the thing Isa remembered afterward over and over. The old woman's face had no anger in it at all. She was looking at the board, at the long, clean line the meridian compass had already begun to draw inward across the plot, straight as a ruler, beautiful, confident, and utterly indifferent to the count. "Ma'am," Isa said. "Log it," said Amadi. "All of it. The offer, the decline, word for word, time-stamped, and copy it to the council and the archive. You think they'll come back and argue about it?" "I think," Amadi said, "that a great many people are going to want to know exactly what we said and exactly when we said it." She stood up slowly and looked at the plot the way you look at weather. "Isa, what's the count doing?" Isa did not have to check. She had been half listening to it all morning the way you half listen to your own heartbeat. "Running fast," she said, "and Kettle's got a spot the size of bellows coming round the limb in about 30 hours. "So it does," said Amadi. "So it does." She put the handset back in its cradle very gently as if it might break. "Get some sleep, apprentice. I don't think we're going to get much for a while." Navigation Adjutant Thavan Kal of the Vessarine Ascendancy was, at that moment, doing his job properly, and it was going to make no difference at all. He had been at his station on the meridian compass for 9 hours, and in those 9 hours he had run the system model 4 times, and 4 times it had come back green. The compass carried the best navigational suite in the survey arm, 140 tons of processing, 40 years of debris field doctrine, algorithms that had threaded the Kessin shoals where the rubble ran 1,000 times denser than this. The model took the local mass distribution, the local velocity field, the primary's radiation profile, and it produced a corridor, and the corridor was clean. The corridor was clean. That was the maddening thing Call would say later over and over to people who did not want to hear it. The corridor was clean when they plotted it. Every number in it was correct. He had one small problem, and the problem was that the humans would not stop talking. They did not talk the way an inferior power talks to a superior one. They did not bluster, they did not plead, they did not threaten. They read out numbers. Every 20 minutes on the marker frequency, a different flat human voice would come on and say something like, "Compass, ferry station, advisory. Bellows field intensity rising. Count at 19 hours and 3 minutes. Drift -8 minutes and holding. Shear front expected at your position plus 4 hours 19. Recommend you hold at your current radius. Pilot available on request." And then they would append a data packet, and the packet would be their entire model, uncompressed, unencrypted, source and all. That was what troubled him, not the warnings, the generosity of them. "They have given us their navigational model," he said to Surveyor Prefect Drell on the 9th hour, "in full, including their sensor architecture and their derivation. It is not obfuscated. I have read it, Prefect. It is elegant." Drell did not look up from her plot. She was old for a Vessarine, her plating gone the dull gray of long service, and she had surveyed for 60 years and had a very simple view of the universe, which was that it was a thing to be measured and then used. "Of course it is elegant," she said. "It is a fabrication. Fabrications are always elegant, Adjutant. Reality is never so tidy. With respect, the model reproduces our own observations of the last 9 hours to within 4%. Ours reproduces them to within 11. Over 9 hours. Over 9 hours, yes." "Adjutant." Drell turned to look at him then, and there was no cruelty in it, only a kind of tired patience. "Consider what you are proposing. 600,000 people on a rock, no fleet, no industry, nothing to bargain with. And within the hour of our arrival they offer us a pilot free of charge to sit on our bridge and speak into our helmsman's ear. What would you do in their position with nothing? You would sell the only thing you had, which is the claim that this place is impassable without you. You would make yourself necessary. It is the oldest tactic on the list, and I have had it tried on me in 900 systems, and it has been true in none of them. And the free rescue? The same tactic with better manners." She turned back to the plot. "They are not lying about the debris. They are lying about what it takes to cross it. Enter the corridor." The meridian compass entered the corridor at 11 hours 40, on a course plotted 11 hours earlier, which was, in the Halloran Reach, roughly equivalent to sailing on last week's forecast. The humans came back on immediately. And now the voice was the old woman's, the one who called herself Pilot Master. "Compass ferry station. You are standing into danger. I say again, you are standing into danger. Your course crosses the sill braid at a point where the braid will be, not where it is. The count has drifted 11 minutes since you plotted. 11 minutes moves the braid 12,000 kilometers across your track. You will not see it coming. The material at that boundary is under a centimeter, and there is no instrument in existence that will paint it for you at closing speed. Turn now, hold at radius, and I will have a pilot to you in 5 hours. Please respond." "Compass to ferry station," said Drell. "Cease transmission on this frequency. It is interfering with our navigational telemetry." That was not true, and Call knew it was not true, and he sat at his station with his hands flat on the board and said nothing. And for the rest of his life he would carry that silence around with him like a stone in his coat. The humans did not cease transmission. They simply moved to a different frequency and kept going, and the log recorded every word. The first thing that went wrong so gently that half the bridge did not notice. At 14 hours and 8 minutes, the compass's hull potential rose. It rose by a little, and then by a little more, and then in 90 seconds it went up by 4 orders of magnitude, and every alarm on the ship that had anything to do with electrical safety came on at once. The current sheet had arrived. It was, by Reach standards, unremarkable, the 7th clap of the cycle, a middling one, the kind of thing Isa Verren had learned to sleep through as a child. It was a surface of moving field 1 plasma thickness deep and 500,000 kilometers across, and it swept over the meridian compass at 400 kilometers a second. And the compass, being 940 meters of superb conductive alloy, did exactly what a 940-meter conductor does when you drag it through a changing magnetic field. It became a circuit. Nothing exploded. That was what nobody outside the Reach ever understood. There was no fire, no breach, no dramatic listing to starboard. There was simply a current, induced along the ship's long axis, 40,000 amperes of it, seeking ground and finding instead 4,000 kilometers of cable trunking, 600 sensor runs, and the beautiful, delicate, magnificently sensitive navigational suite of a first-rate Ascendancy survey vessel. The suite lasted 11 seconds. The main bus lasted 19. At 14 hours and 10 minutes, the meridian compass was a 940-meter object moving at 80 kilometers a second on a fixed heading with no engines, no attitude control, no long-range sensors, and 1 working radio, and Thaven Call, sitting in the dark with the emergency chemical lamps coming up amber around him, understood everything at once, the way you understand a sentence you have already read 4 times. They had not been attacked. Nothing had hit them. The Ascendancy had brought the finest instrument of navigation in 900 systems into a place where the ground itself moved, and the place had simply gone about its ordinary afternoon, and the instrument had died of it. "Prefect," he said into the amber dark, "we are on the braid course." 9 hours. Drell said nothing for a long moment. Then, without any change in her voice at all, she said, "Adjutant, open the marker frequency." The humans were already there. They had been there the whole time. That was the part that Call never managed to explain properly afterward to the Board of Inquiry, that the humans had not gone away and come back in triumph. They had simply not stopped. The channel had been open for 14 hours and there was a woman's voice on it, and when Drell finally spoke into it, the woman answered in under a second, as if she had been sitting with her hand on the switch. "Compass Ferry Station, go ahead." Ferry Station. Drell's mandibles worked once. Meridian compass has suffered a total loss of propulsion and navigation. 911 souls aboard. We are on a ballistic heading. We request, and here she stopped for exactly 1 second, and Call watched 60 years of a certain kind of pride go over a cliff without a sound. We request assistance. Compass Ferry Station. Understood. 911 souls, ballistic, no attitude control. Boats are already launched, Prefect. They went 20 minutes ago when your hull potential spiked. Estimated alongside in 4 hours 10. Now listen to me carefully because the next 4 hours are yours, not mine, and there are 3 things you have to do and they are all boring. Ground every conductive run you can reach to your hull with anything you have. Cable, tools, a person's belt, anything. There'll be another sheet in 5 hours, and if you're floating ungrounded it'll cook what's left. Second, do not fire anything. Not a jet, not a flare, not a torpedo, not a scrap of gas. If we can't trust your vector, we can't come alongside. Third, get every soul you have into the middle third of the hull, on the axis, and put mass between them and the direction you're moving. When the shot front comes, you'll want the ship's own body in front of you. Do those 3 things and I will bring your people home. Ferry Station standing by. Drell stood in the amber dark and looked at the speaker. "Why," she said, "are you coming?" There was a pause on the line, and Carl would remember thinking that it was the pause of someone who genuinely had not expected the question. "Because you're in trouble in my water," said the human. "Ferry station out." Isa Verren was 7,000 kilometers out from the compass when she first saw it with her eyes, and the sight nearly stopped her heart, because it was beautiful. She had expected something crude. She did not know why. The thing hanging dead in the dark ahead of her was a spear of mirrored silver, 900 meters of it, fluted along its flanks like a column, and every line of it said money and time and confidence, and it was the single most helpless object Isa had ever seen in her life. "Look at it," she said. "Don't," said Amati. "Look at your board." There were 9 boats on the job: Small Mercy, Patience, Long Odds, Mudlark, Thistle, Two Bells, Corncrake, Fair Warning, and a station tender called Big Ugly that could take 400 people in her holds if you packed them like grain. Between them they massed less than 1,000th of the ship they had come for. They did not tow the compass. You could not tow the compass. The mass ratio was farcical. What you did instead was what humans had been doing in the Reach for 2 centuries, which was to take the people off and let the rock go where the rock was going. It took 11 hours. Isa spent 9 of them in the listening cradle calling the count, because Amati was flying, and because Small Mercy had ended up as the ear for the whole flotilla, which meant that every boat out there was steering on the word of a 19-year-old apprentice with her cheek against a hull. She called the 4th sheet at 31 minutes, and the boats went to the lee of the compass's own body, and rode it out in the wake of the dead ship. She called a shot veil at 94 minutes, a thin one, and Long Odds took 11 impacts and lost a whisker array and kept working. At the 6th hour she heard something she did not have a name for, a rasp under the hiss that came and went, and she said so, out loud on the flotilla channel. "There's something at 11 o'clock low that I don't like and I can't tell you why." And Amati did not ask her why, and neither did any of the 8 other boats. They just moved. 40 minutes later, a fragment of the old sills, crust the size of a HAB module, went through the volume they had been working in, tumbling, silent, on a resonance nobody had charted. Nobody said anything about it on the channel. Afterward, in the hall, 3 separate pilots came and stood near Isa and did not say anything about it either, which in the Reach meant a great deal. Thavan Kal came off the Meridian compass in the last boatload, because Drell would not leave until her crew was off, and he would not leave before his prefect. And so the 2 of them ended up crammed into the aft cabin of an 11-meter human cutter, with their plating scraping the ceiling, breathing air that smelled of solder and somebody's lunch, watching a 19-year-old human girl climb out of a hole in the front of the boat. She had a smear of grease on her cheekbone. Her hands were shaking very slightly with what he recognized after a moment as pure exhaustion. She looked at the 2 enormous armored beings folded into her cabin and said, "There's soup in the yellow locker. It's not much. Sorry." Drell stared at her. "You are the navigator," the prefect said. It was not a question. She had heard the girl's voice on the flotilla channel for 11 hours. "I'm an apprentice," Isa said. "Pilot Master Amati's flying, I just listen." "To what?" Isa thought about it. Carl watched her think, and noticed, with a kind of vertigo, that she was not thinking about how to explain it. She was thinking about whether it was worth explaining to someone who had already told her that her offer was a child's. "To what's already happened somewhere else," she said at last. "Everything out here tells you what it's going to do about 11 minutes before it does it. You just have to be listening on the right thing." She shrugged, a small human motion. "That's it. That's the whole trick. It's not a secret. We sent it to you." "Yes," said Carl. "You did." Drell said nothing at all. The Meridian compass crossed the sill braid 9 hours later, unmanned, on the heading she had been given by the finest navigational suite in the survey arm, and the braid took her apart over the course of a day and a half. Not violently. A centimeter at a time, at 11 kilometers a second, until there was nothing left worth the name. 911 souls came off her. 911 souls went home. It cost the Reach 4,000 tons of reaction mass, 11 days of pilot time, 1 whisker array, and the sleep of about 600 people. And when the Ascendancy's relief cruiser came out to the marker to collect its castaways, Ferry Station sent across an itemized statement of the whole operation with a total at the bottom. The total was 0. Call saw the statement. He held it in his hands on the shuttle out. He read the 0 4 times, and he was still reading it when the human handling their departure, an unbothered woman in a foundry coverall, leaned in and said the thing he never got out of his head. "Next time," she said, "just take the pilot, it's the same price." The Ascendancy's Board of Inquiry into the loss of the Meridian Compass sat for 9 days on Vess Prime, in a hall of white stone that had been built when humans were still learning to smelt iron, and it reached its findings in the 9th hour of the 9th day. The findings were these: that the survey vessel Meridian Compass had been lost due to a catastrophic electrical event of local origin. That Surveyor Prefect Amon Drell had exercised sound judgment in all respects prior to the event, and was commended for the preservation of her crew. That the navigational suite had performed within specification. That the local phenomenon exceeded the design envelope of the suite, and that the envelope should be revised at the next refit cycle. And that the assistance rendered by the human polity of the Halloran Reach, while materially effective, was to be regarded with caution, as it was consistent with a deliberate strategy of manufactured indispensability. Thavan Kal testified on the 6th day. He had prepared for 11 weeks. He brought the human model with him, the whole thing, and he brought his own reconstruction, which showed that if the compass had accepted a pilot at the marker, she would have been at the 4th body in 4 days with no damage of any kind. And he brought the 11 hours of recorded advisories in which a woman on a rock had told them precisely what was going to happen to them, and precisely when. He spoke for 2 hours. The board listened with perfect courtesy. Then the presiding officer, a legate general named Kemathro, who had never in his life been anywhere that was not already mapped, asked him one question. "Adjutant, in your assessment, is the Halloran Reach navigable by an Ascendancy vessel without human assistance?" Kal had known the question was coming and had rehearsed the answer, and when it came, he found that the rehearsed answer would not fit in his mouth, because the true answer was not a military answer. The true answer was that it was navigable in the way that a language is speakable, by someone who has spoken it since childhood, and by nobody else, and no amount of dictionaries will close the gap, because the thing changes while you are reading about it. "No, sir," he said, "not safely, not on any timescale that matters to this body. Ever. With 30 years of instrumentation and a permanent observation network, perhaps. We would be building, over 30 years, what they already have. And what they already have is not a network, sir. It is a population. It is 600,000 people who have lived inside the phenomenon for 200 years and who hear it the way we hear a room." There was a silence in the White Hall, and Kal, who was not a fool, understood in that silence that he had just made an argument that could be read 2 ways, and that the board had chosen the other one. "Thank you, Adjutant," said Kemathro. "You have been most clear." The annexation order was signed 41 days later. It was not, in the end, about the humans at all, which was the thing Kal found hardest to bear. The Reach sat at the mouth of the cordon, and the cordon was the only economical transit into the far arm, and a survey of the compass's telemetry had established that the kettle system contained, in the wreckage of the sill, more accessible heavy metal than the nearest 4 Ascendancy provinces combined. Some clerk had run the numbers, and the numbers had been very large. And there was no fleet there. That was written in the order in as many words. The territory possesses no organized naval force and no capacity to construct one, Anticipated resistance, negligible. The order tasked the third cohort of the home fleet, 38 hulls, 4 of them of the line, under Prefect Anaru Sest. It instructed the cohort to enter the Halloran Reach, take station over Ferry Station, receive the surrender of the civil authority, and administer the territory pending survey. It allocated a full year of provisions and a standing bounty for the first cargo of Sil metal. And in an annex at the back in small type, it appointed Navigation Adjutant Thaven Kal as local conditions advisor to the cohort staff, an appointment which carried no authority, no staff, and no seat in the operations room, and which every officer who read it understood perfectly. He had said a thing the service did not want said. Now he would go and stand in the corner of the thing he had objected to and watch it work and learn. He went aboard the flagship Unbroken Ordnance on a gray morning and was shown to a cabin the size of a closet, and he took with him one item of personal property beyond his kit, which was a printed copy of a human itemized statement with a 0 at the bottom of it. The Reach knew they were coming 10 weeks before they arrived, because the Reach's telescopes were old and small and pointed at the cordon out of 2 centuries of habit, and 38 drive flares in close order are not a subtle thing. The council met in the pilot hall, because it was the biggest room on Ferry Station, and 600,000 people watched on the feed, and the meeting lasted 11 hours, and Isa Verren sat through every minute of it on the floor at the back with her arms around her knees. There was a faction that wanted to fight. It was small and it was loud and it was not stupid. Its argument was simple, and it was made by a foundry engineer named Petra Hollies, who stood up and said, "We have 240 boats. We have 40,000 tons of ore. We know where every rock in this system is going to be for the next 900 years. We could put 100,000 tons of gravel across their approach on the count, and they would fly into it at 80 kilometers a second, and there would be nothing left of the third cohort but a report. We could do it in a week. We could do it with mining charges and a spreadsheet." Nobody in the hall said she was wrong. That was the terrible part. Everybody in that room knew, with the certainty of arithmetic, that she was right. The Reach could not build a warship and could not have crewed one if it had, but the Reach could do the one thing that the Count made possible, which was to know exactly where a thing would be. And if you know exactly where a thing will be, you do not need a weapon. You need a rock and patience. They talked about it for 4 hours. In the end, it was Amati who ended it, and she did not do it with an argument about ethics. She did it with an argument about work. She stood up, and the hall went quiet, and she said, "Petra's right. We could. It'd work. I want everyone watching this to understand that, because I don't want anybody thinking we were noble. We weren't offered a choice between dying and killing. We were offered a choice between killing and something harder. Here's the something harder. 210 years ago, people came here in ships that couldn't leave and found a system that killed 9,000 of them in 40 years. And they didn't beat it. Nobody beats it. What they did was learn to hear it, and then they made a rule, and the rule is the only actual thing we own. The rule is, when a ship is in trouble in our water, we go. Not our ship, not our people, any ship, any people, free, every time. No exceptions, because the second there's one exception, there's a second one. And then the rule's just a preference, and men like the skipper of the Verity Dane start doing sums about whether it applies to them. Now, if we put gravel on the count and kill 38 ships, we will have used the count as a weapon. And from that day, forever, every ship that ever comes to this marker will know that the people offering them a free pilot are the people who once used their listening to kill 9,000 strangers. And they will never take the pilot again. Not one of them. Not ever. We'd win. And we'd have thrown away the only reason anybody would ever have to trust us, and the rule would be dead, and then it'd just be us and the rocks and a bad reputation. So no, we don't fight. We do what we do. We warn them. We warn them until we're hoarse. We give them everything, the model, the count, the whole 200 years of it free in their own language over and over, and we beg them to take a pilot. And when they don't listen, she stopped. She looked around the hall at 400 pilots and their families. When they don't listen, we go and get them, all of them, as many as we can reach. And it will be the worst thing any of us has ever done, and we will do it anyway because that's the rule and the rule is us. The vote was 411 to 19. They spent the next 9 weeks doing 2 things. The first was warning. They built a transmission and they aimed it down the cordon and they ran it on a loop, 40 hours a day, on every frequency the Ascendancy had ever used and 11 they had not. It contained the model. It contained the count with the drift, updated hourly. It contained a plain language explanation of induction in large conductive hulls, with worked examples, at a level that assumed no prior knowledge and no bad faith. It contained a map of the cohort's most probable approach vectors with the hazard windows marked in the Ascendancy's own notation, because a 19-year-old apprentice had spent 4 days learning their notation off the compass's rec data in order to do it. That had been Isa's job. She had done it because Amati had handed her the file and said, "You've got the best ear in the hall and the worst handwriting, and this needs the ear." And it contained, at the end of every cycle, the same 11 words in flat Vessarine spoken by Amati. "There is a pilot at the marker. He is free. Please." The second thing they did was get ready to go and get them. They stripped every hold on the station. They pulled the cargo racks out of Big Ugly and welded in benches for 1,100. They converted 3 ore tenders into casualty hulls. They stockpiled 400,000 liters of breathable and rigged 40 kilometers of soft tubing into HAB bladders that could be blown out in a hangar in 90 seconds. They cut the pilot services rest rules in half and then in half again. Every boat in the Reach got new whiskers, hand-strung, because the machines could not do it as well as a person's fingers. And they built in the pilot hall on the wall opposite the names of the dead, a plot of the cohort's approach, and they marked on it, in ordinary marker pen, the places where the ships would die. They knew. That was the dread of it, and Isa carried the dread in her chest for 9 weeks like a swallowed stone. They were not guessing. They stood in front of that board, and they read the cohort's own published transit doctrine, which the Ascendancy had never bothered to classify because who would care? And they took the cohort's mass and its formation depth and its shield geometry and its drive profile, and they ran it against the count, and out came a set of times and places, and the times and places were as certain as a tide table. 38 ships, 11,000 souls. The plot said the formation would begin to come apart at hour 14, and would be beyond help at hour 31, and that the 4 ships of the line, the big ones, the pride of the home fleet, would be the first to go, because they were the largest conductors and they carried the deepest shields, and shields in the Reach were an invitation. "They're going to bring them in tight," said a pilot named Dov Aurelio, who was 22 and had never seen a warship. "Look, their doctrines got them in a column at 400 meters separation for the whole transit." "Why?" said Isa. "Mutual support. It's how you cross hostile space." Isa looked at the plot for a long moment. 240 boats, and 38 ships in a column 400 meters apart, and the 7th clap of the cycle coming across all of them at once like a hand across a harp. "They're going to hold formation," she said slowly, "into the sheet. That's the doctrine. But if they hold formation when the lead ship's bus goes, the ones behind won't." She stopped. She had gone white. Amati across the hall was watching her. "Say it," Amati said. Isa said it. "If the leader dies and they hold formation, the whole column flies into the braid together, all of them, on the same heading, 400 meters apart at 80 kilometers a second, and the ones in front will still be there when the ones behind arrive." The hall was very quiet. "That's right," said Amati. "How many boats do we have?" 240. How many people are we going to have to pull out of that? 11,000, said Amati, if we're quick. Isa looked at the wall of names, and then at the plot, and then at her own hands, which were 19 years old and not shaking, which surprised her. Then we'd better be quick, she said. 3 days before the cohort reached the marker, Isa Verren sat her pilot's examination, 4 months early, because the service needed the boats crewed, and there was nobody else with an ear like hers, and everybody knew it and nobody said it. She passed the practical without breaking a sweat. She nearly failed the oral because the examiner asked her how she knew the count had drifted, and she said, "I heard it." And the examiner patiently said, "Pilot, you must be able to show you're working, because one day you will have to tell a frightened man on a foreign bridge why he must turn, and I heard it will not move him." So she sat there for 40 minutes and she showed her working, all of it, the beat frequency and the phase lag and the field intensity, and the mantle chunk that told you where the sheet was because it lit up before anything else did, and at the end of it the examiner put down her pen. "Where'd you learn to do that?" the examiner asked. 9 hours on the compass job, Isa said. "Ma'am, there was a 900-meter ship out there full of people who couldn't hear any of it. It's not enough to know. You have to be able to hand it to somebody." They gave her a license that afternoon and a boat that evening. She kept Small Mercy's name. Amati moved to Big Ugly to run the flotilla, because somebody had to, and because a 66-year-old woman's hands were not what they had been, and because, she said, when you have taught a thing you have to let it go and stand in the back and watch it work. That night Isa lay awake in her bunk and listened to the count through 11 centimeters of hab wall, the way she had every night of her life, and 38 drive flares came down the cordon toward her like a line of lamps. The third cohort of the home fleet came to the marker on a Tuesday, which the Reach noted, because it had been a Tuesday the first time. They came in a column, 4 ships of the line at the head, unbroken ordnance leading, then the cruisers, then the auxiliaries, then the transports with the survey crews and the administrators and a year of provisions, 38 hulls in a line 90 kilometers long, holding station to the meter. And it was, by every account that survived, the most beautiful thing anyone in the Reach had ever seen. Isa Verren watched it come in on the optics from Small Mercy's cradle, holding station 11,000 kilometers off the marker with 239 other boats spread behind her in the dark like a scatter of seed, and she found she could not hate it. It was too well made. Somebody had cared about those hulls. Somebody had polished them. Prefect Anaru Sest brought his column to a stop at the marker, as doctrine required, to make the formal declaration. He was not a cruel person. It mattered later that people understood this. He was 51 years old. He had 2 children. He had spent his career doing the Ascendancy's unglamorous work in places where the Ascendancy's arrival had genuinely improved matters, and he had read the file on the Halloran Reach twice, and had drawn from it the conclusion that any reasonable officer would draw, that this was a small, poor, decent, rather admirable population which was about to have a bad month, and then a much better century. He read the declaration himself. It took 4 minutes. It offered the civil authority of the Halloran Reach the protection and administration of the Vessarine Ascendancy, guaranteed the persons and property of all inhabitants, and required the surrender of the marker, the traffic control system, and the pilot service within 11 hours. Then he waited. The answer came back from ferry station in 90 seconds, which meant it had been written weeks ago, and it was not the answer he expected. Third cohort, ferry station pilot service, pilot master Amati. Prefect, the council will answer your declaration in their own words in their own time, and it's not my business. I'm not the government. I'm the pilot service, and I have exactly one thing to say to you, and I'm going to say it plainly because I've got no time to be clever. Do not enter this system on your present heading. I'm not saying that as a defense. I have nothing to defend it with. I have 240 boats out here and not one of them is armed, and you could go through us like a hand through smoke and we both know it. This is not resistance. This is pilotage. You have our model. You've had it for 10 weeks. Your adjutant Call has it and I'd bet my boat he's checked it. Check it again. Your transit doctrine has you in column at 400 meters for the whole run. At hour 14 of that run, you will cross a current sheet with your whole column inside it at once, and your ships of the line will take the worst of it because they're the biggest conductors in your fleet, and because your shield geometry will gather the field instead of shedding it. Your leaders will lose their buses. You will be ballistic, and your doctrine will hold your column on that heading, and at hour 31 your column will arrive, all of it, still 400 meters apart at the sill braid. Prefect, I've been reading this system for 44 years, and I am telling you that I know where your ships will be at hour 31, and I know what will be there with them. There is a pilot at the marker. There are 240. Take one aboard each hull if you want, or one aboard the lead and let the rest follow her water. Put a Marine on his shoulder if you like. He'll only talk. He's free, he's always been free. He was free for the compass and he's free for you. If you come in with pilots, you'll be over ferry station in 4 days with your paint unscratched, and we'll have whatever argument the council wants to have with our feet on the deck like civilized people. If you come in without them, we'll follow you, and we'll keep talking the whole way, and when it goes wrong we will come and get your people out. That's the whole offer, please, ferry station out. On the bridge of the unbroken ordnance, nobody said anything for several seconds. Then Cest's operations officer, a decent, careful man named Isa Verren, said what everybody on that bridge was thinking, and what any officer of any service in the history of the arm would have thought. Sir, they are asking us to put their nationals on our bridges, on our approach, with our formation in transit, on the argument that we cannot fly without them. Yes, said Cest. The lead hull would be under their direction at the moment of our maximum vulnerability. Yes. Sir, if I were them and I had no fleet, that is precisely the operation I would run. It costs them nothing to say. It costs us everything to accept. And if we accept and they are lying, we have handed them the cohort. And if we accept and they are telling the truth, then we have accepted in front of the whole arm that the Ascendancy cannot enter a system without a local child in the helmsman's ear. Sir, we would never leave. Every hull we ever sent would need one. We would be annexing a territory that owns us. And that in the end was the thing. Not arrogance exactly, not contempt, though there had been plenty of that. It was that the humans had offered the Ascendancy a gift which, if it were real, meant the Ascendancy was not what it believed itself to be, and there was no way to test the gift that did not require believing it first. Cest had one man in the room who had already believed it. Advisor Call, he said, you were on the compass, speak. Call stood up in the corner, where he had been standing for 11 weeks. Sir, he said, everything in that transmission is true. I have checked their model against the compass telemetry 400 times. It predicts what killed us to within 4%, 11 hours ahead. Ours predicted nothing at all. The Prefect Drell did not make an error, sir. She made the correct decision using the correct instruments, and the instruments were the wrong kind of instrument, and this system does not forgive that, and it will not forgive it for us either. And the risk that they are lying. Sir, they pulled 911 of us out of a dead hull over 11 days at their own cost and billed us nothing. If they wanted a hostage, they had 911. If they wanted a weapon, they have had 10 weeks and a rock in every drawer. Call's voice did not rise. He had learned that from a woman on a radio. Sir, the risk is not that they are lying. The risk is that they are right and we cannot afford for them to be. Cest looked at him for a long moment. Thank you, advisor, he said. That is the clearest statement of the problem I have heard. He turned to the plot. And it is still the problem. Verren is correct. If I take a pilot at the marker, the Ascendancy has taken a pilot at the marker, and there is no untaking it. Whatever this system is, we cannot be a power that cannot enter it alone. He stood a moment more. Signal ferry station, he said. Offer declined with the cohort's respect. Enter the corridor. Column, doctrine separation. And Veyer put the advisor's model on the auxiliary plot and run it alongside ours. If nothing else, we will learn something. That last order was the only reason anyone in the Reach ever forgave him. The third cohort entered the Halloran Reach at 11:40 on a Tuesday, 38 hulls in perfect order. And behind them, at a respectful distance of 11,000 kilometers, 240 unarmed boats came after them like gulls behind a plow. Hour 4, ferry station, third cohort advisory. Count 19 hours 1 minute, drift -11. Your track is good, nothing for 8 hours. Hour 8, third cohort advisory. Bellows field rising. Kettle's active region is on the meridian and it's throwing. Sheet arrival at your position, hour 14 plus or minus 11 minutes. Recommend you break column now and open to 11 kilometers separation. If you do nothing else, do that. Please break column. They did not break column. Hour 11. Sest on the bridge watching 2 plots. His own said clear. Calls said 14 hours and 11 minutes. Hour 13. Third cohort ferry station. You are standing into danger. Sheet at 59 minutes. Break column. Ground your runs. Shut down your shields, Prefect, I'm begging you. Your shields are the problem. They're gathering the field. Shut them down and you'll keep your bus. On the bridge of the unbroken ordnance, Isa Verren said, very quietly, Sir, they are asking us to lower our shields. Sest closed his eyes for 1 second. No, he said. Hour 14, 11 minutes. It happened almost exactly as a 66-year-old woman on a rock had said it would, and it took less time than it takes to describe. The 7th clap of the cycle came across the column at 400 kilometers a second. It did not hit them. It passed through them. A sheet of moving field 500,000 kilometers wide and 1 plasma thickness deep, and 38 superb conductive hulls, in perfect line, with their shield geometries live and gathering, went through it together. The unbroken ordnance took 80,000 amperes. Her bus lasted 14 seconds. Her navigational core, which was the finest in the home fleet, lasted 9. Her shield emitters, which had been gathering the field like a hand cupped to catch rain, went first of all in 3 and took the forward power trunk with them. Down the column it went, ship after ship, 400 meters apart, and the ones at the back had 11 seconds of warning, which was 11 seconds more than the compass had had and not nearly enough. And of the 38 hulls of the third cohort, 31 lost main propulsion in under a minute. The 7 that did not were the 7 smallest, 3 couriers, 2 tenders, and 2 of the transports, which had the least conductive area and the cheapest shields, and in one case, no shields at all. The 4 ships of the line all died. There was no explosion, there was no battle. There was a sudden vast silence across 90 kilometers of dark, and a line of the most powerful vessels in that quarter of the arm hanging in it, going 80 kilometers a second toward a place they could no longer see, on a heading they could no longer change. Anaru Sest stood on a bridge lit by amber chemical lamps and looked at an auxiliary plot that was still running, because Kal had put it on an isolated battery pack with hand-soldered joints, because a human woman had told him 9 weeks ago on an open channel to ground everything he could reach, and he had been the only officer in the cohort who had done it. The plot said, Sil Braid, hour 31. Advisor, Sest said, how long? 16 hours and 40 minutes, sir, said Kal. 11,000 souls. Sest looked at the plot for 3 seconds, which was, according to the record, the entire duration of his deliberation. Open the marker frequency, he said. The humans were already there. They had never left. For 14 hours the channel had been open, and a voice had come on it every 20 minutes, and now, When the prefect of the third cohort spoke into it, the answer came back in under a second, and it was not triumph, and it was not reproach, and it was not even anger. It was a 19-year-old girl's voice, flat and slow and friendly, and it said, "Third cohort, pilot Small Mercy. Go ahead, prefect." Seth's mandibles worked once. On the bridge of the unbroken ordnance in the amber dark, with 4,000 of his people in the dead hulls behind him, and 11,000 in the line, the commander of the third cohort of the home fleet of the Vessarine Ascendancy said the words that went into every history the arm ever wrote about that day. "Pilot," he said, "this is unarmed. I am asking for a pilot." "Pilots," Isa Verren corrected. 240 of them, prefect. They launched 14 minutes ago when your hull potential spiked. I'm 900 kilometers off your bow, and I've been there since hour 12. You anticipated this. Sir, we told you the hour. Yes, said Seth. You did. Prefect, I need you to listen now, because we're going to do this in two parts, and the first part is boring, and the second part is not. Boring part, ground everything. Every conductive run to hull right now, with anything, we've got 17 hours, and there'll be 4 more sheets in that time, and if you're ungrounded, they'll take what you've got left. Get your people to the middle third on the axis. Do not fire anything, not one jet. Not boring part. Your column's going to arrive at the braid in 16 hours and 40 minutes, and we can't move your ships. Your ships are gone, prefect. I'm sorry. Nobody can move 1,100,000 tons, and there is nothing in this system that can. So we're not going to move your ships. We're going to move your people. 240 boats, 11,000 souls, 16 hours. Prefect, we can do this. But every single thing we do from here has to be done on my count, and my count is not your clock, and there will be minutes where I tell you to stand still in the dark and do nothing while your people are frightened, and it will feel like I have abandoned you. I have not. When I say hold, you hold. When I say now, you go, and you do not ask why, because the why takes 11 seconds, and 11 seconds is a boat. Do you understand what I'm asking you for? You are asking me, Seth said slowly, to give you my fleet. No, sir, said Isa. I'm asking you to give me your ear. There was a pause of perhaps 2 seconds. Pilot Small Mercy, said Honorou Sest, the third cohort is yours. Say your count. What followed was, by any measure anyone has since applied to it, the largest single act of pilotage in the history of the arm, and almost none of it looked like anything at all. There were no heroics in the first 11 hours. There was arithmetic. Isa Verren lay in the listening cradle of Small Mercy with her cheek against the hull, and ran a rescue of 11,000 people the way she had been taught to run a hauler out of a closing draw, which is to say slowly, and in the right order, and never once in a hurry, because hurry is what kills you in the Reach. She took the column in reverse. That was the first decision, and it was hers, and it was the one the Ascendancy's own academy would spend the next 40 years teaching, because it was completely counter to every rescue doctrine anyone had ever written. Doctrine said you take the flagship first. Command continuity, the senior officers, the people who can help you organize the rest. Isa took the tail first. The back of your column hits the braid last, she told Sest. You've got 31 hours at the back and 16 at the front. So I take the back first, because I can get 4 boats to a tail transport and back in 90 minutes, and I'd rather spend my cheap hours on my cheap runs. The front's expensive. I want every boat I've got, and every minute of the count when I go for the front. You are leaving my line ships until last. Yes, sir. They have the most souls. They have 4,100 minutes, Isa said. The tail has 7,000 in a day. Prefect, if I go for you first, I'll lose the tail while I'm doing it, and then I'll lose you anyway, because by the time I get back to the front, the third and fourth sheets will have gone through, and I won't have boats. Do you want the arithmetic, or do you want the order? There was a pause. Say your count, pilot, said Sest. So it went. Boats went out and boats came back. Big Ugly sat in the lee of a piece of the old sill for 11 hours with her holds filling up with Vessarine, 400 at a time, and Amati ran her from the flight deck with a headset and a mug of something cold. The 3 converted ore tenders took 900 each. The transports at the tail were emptied one by one and left in the dark. At hour 19, the second sheet came through, and Isa called it 41 minutes out, and every boat in the flotilla went to lee or went dead stick, and the sheet went over them and took nothing. 11 of the cohort's hulls, sitting ungrounded because their crews had not understood the instruction the first time, lost their emergency lighting and their air circulation and their internal doors, and had to be opened by human cutting crews going hull to hull with hand tools. And 400 Vessarine spent 11 hours in the dark in their own ships listening to strangers cut their way in. At hour 23, a boat called Corncrake was on her way back from the 11th transport with 61 souls aboard when a shot veil came across her that nobody had called, because it was riding a resonance off a mantle chunk that was not on anybody's plot, and Corncrake took 11 impacts through her forward third at a closing speed of 9 kilometers a second. Her pilot was Dov Aurelio, who was 22, and who had never seen a warship until that Tuesday. He got the boat's aft section sealed, and he got 61 Vessarine into the aft section, and he did not get himself into it, because the door had to be closed from the wrong side, and he closed it, and then he sat down in the ruined nose of his boat and put his cheek against the hull the way he had been taught, and called the veil for the flotilla for 9 more minutes so that nobody else would fly into it, until his air ran out. They named the 19th name on the wall for him. They put the veil on the chart and named that for him too, which he would have found funnier. On the flotilla channel, Isa Verren said, "Corncrake's gone." Aurelio's ear was good. The veils on the plot, steer off it. Long odds, take his sector. Her voice did not change. It was flat and slow and friendly, and it did not change once in 17 hours. And afterward, when the Ascendancy's inquiry played the recording, more than one officer had to leave the room. At hour 28, with the tail emptied and 7,000 Vessarine crammed into human hulls and human bladders and human cargo holds, Isa Verren turned 211 boats around and went for the front of the column. The 4 ships of the line were 3 hours from the braid. "Prefect," she said, "here's the hard part. I can't come alongside you where you are. You're inside the first stream already and the count's running fast, and if I put boats on your flank at hour 29, I lose them to the shot when the stream comes up. There's one window and it's 94 seconds long and it's at hour 30, and it's in the lee of a body you can't see and I can. You're going to have to get your people onto your hull, all 4,000, outside on the skin in suits holding on in the dark before hour 30, and then when I say now they let go." The bridge of the unbroken ordnance was silent. "You are asking me," said Cest, "to put 4,000 people into open space, unsecured from a ship moving at 80 kilometers a second on your word?" "Yes, sir." "If your window is wrong, they will die in vacuum instead of dying in a hull." "Sir, if my window's wrong they die either way, and so do my 200 boats. That's not a comfort. I'm telling you so you know I've got the same stake." "How old are you, pilot?" Isa, 19 years old, lying in the nose of an 11-meter boat with her cheek against the hull and 11,000 lives on her count, said, "Sir, that's not a useful question. Ask me how long I've been listening." A pause. "How long have you been listening, pilot?" 19 years, said Isa Verren. There wasn't anything else to do. Honoré Cest turned to his operations officer. "Veyer," he said, "all hands to the hull." They came out of the unbroken ordnance and her 3 sisters like grain out of a torn sack, 4,000 Vessarine in emergency suits, hand over hand along 90 meters of mirrored flank, clipping onto rails and stanchions and each other in the dark, with no light but their own lamps and the amber wash from the open locks behind them. Some of them had never been outside a hull in their lives. Administrators, cooks, a librarian. They came out and they held on and they waited on the word of a human they had been told, 10 weeks earlier, was negligible. Call came out with them. He had a printed sheet of paper zipped inside his suit, which was against every regulation there was. Small Mercy came in at hour 29:40, and behind her came 210 boats in a line, and Isa Verren threaded them all into the lee of a 4-kilometer chunk of a dead world's mantle that the charts called Grand and everybody called the Barn, and she did it in the dark, on account that had drifted 11 minutes in the last day, with her eyes shut. 94 seconds, she said. On my mark. Prefect, when I say now, every soul lets go at once. Do not push off. Do not thrust, just let go. You're all doing 80 kilometers a second already. You'll drift a meter a second relative, and that's all I need. My boats will be there. Don't help us. Helping is what kills you. Everyone in the flotilla. You'll have 94 seconds in the Barn's wake, and then the third sheet comes over, and after that the stream comes up, and anything still out there stays out there. Nobody makes a second pass. Nobody. If you can't take a soul in 94 seconds, you leave, and I'll live with it, and so will you. Stand by. Stand by. Now. 4,000 Vessarine, let go of a warship. 211 human boats went into the space where they had been. There was no sound. There was never any sound. There was a cloud of 4,000 tumbling figures in the dark, and a scatter of small, ugly ships moving through them at a meter a second, with their holds open, and their crews hanging out of the locks with grapples and their bare hands. And there was a 19-year-old girl's voice on the channel counting down from 94 in a tone you would use to read a shopping list. At 41 seconds, a boat called Thistle had her hold full and would not leave, and her pilot took 11 more onto her hull, physically onto the outside of an 11-meter cutter, and flew home like that with people clinging to her whiskers. At 22 seconds, Big Ugly was so full that Amati was calling her mass out loud on the channel like a bookie. At 11 seconds, Small Mercy had 31 souls in a cabin rated for 4, and Isa Verren still had her cheek on the hull, and she heard the sheet coming the way you hear a train, and she said, "Everybody out now, on your own water go." And 211 boats broke out of the Barn's wake in every direction like a shoal. The third sheet came over at 96 seconds. It was 2 seconds late. She had been 2 seconds wrong over 17 hours, and for the rest of her life those 2 seconds were the thing Isa Verren wanted to talk about, and nobody ever let her. They lost 11 people in the run. 9 Vessarine, drifting, unreachable, past the line where a boat could turn. 2 humans, on a cutter called Fair Warning that went for a 10th grapple at 8 seconds and did not come out of the wake. They saved 3,991. The unbroken ordnance crossed the Sill Braid 94 minutes later with nobody aboard, and the braid took her over the following 2 days, a centimeter at a time, and her 3 sisters after her, and the 27 hulls behind them in the order they had been in, 400 meters apart, exactly as an old woman had said they would. 31 ships of the 3rd cohort of the home fleet of the Vessarine Ascendancy died in the Halloran Reach on a Tuesday. 10,989 of their people did not. They came into ferry station over the next 6 days, 11,000 Vessarine in a station built for 400,000 humans, and the Reach turned its gymnasiums and its foundry floors and its farm halls into barracks, and gave away 4 months of its own food reserve, and never once mentioned the declaration of annexation that was still, technically, sitting on the council's table awaiting a reply. Anaru Sest came aboard on the 4th day. He had not slept. He was met at the lock by the council chair, a farm administrator named Reyes, who shook his hand, and said the council's answer to his declaration would be ready in a week if that was convenient, and then took him to see his wounded. On the wall by the main lock there were 19 names. Seth stopped in front of them because the human beside him had stopped. 210 years, said Reyes. Those are the ones the rule cost us. 9,000 died here before there was a rule. These 19 died because of it. She let him look. The two at the end are from Tuesday, Aurelio and Ende. Ende was on fair warning. She went back for a 10th. Seth looked at the wall for a long time. You could have killed us, he said at last. At any hour of that transit, you knew where we would be. You have known where we would be for 10 weeks. Yes, said Reyes. Why didn't you? Because then nobody would ever take the pilot again, said Reyes. And the pilot is the only thing we've got. Thavan Call gave evidence to the second inquiry for 9 days. He did not need to say very much in the end. The recording said it. 17 hours of a 19-year-old human's voice counting, flat and slow and friendly, over the deaths of 31 ships. 10 weeks of an old woman saying please into a channel nobody would answer. An itemized statement with a 0 at the bottom of it, which he unfolded and read into the record on the 9th day, because it was the only thing he had that made the point in 1 page. The Ascendancy's finding, when it came, was 11 words long in the summary and 400 pages long underneath, and the 11 words were these. The Halloran Reach is not weak, the Halloran Reach is home. The pilotage compact was signed 9 months later at the marker, aboard a human station tender called Big Ugly, because the Ascendancy's delegation asked to sign it there and would not be talked out of it. It said that the Halloran Reach was sovereign in its own water. It said that the Ascendancy renounced all claim in perpetuity and would take its metal by trade like anyone else. It said that no vessel of any registry would enter the Reach without a pilot aboard, and that pilotage would remain free forever. Funded by a levy, the Ascendancy volunteered to pay 4 times over, and which the Council reduced in committee to exactly what everyone else paid, on the grounds that a rule with a rich exception is not a rule. And it contained 1 clause that nobody in the Reach had asked for, which Anaru Sest wrote himself and made a condition of his signature. It said that the Ascendancy's Academy would teach the Halloran Transit, and would teach it not as a hazard but as a discipline, and that the first lesson of the first year would be the recording of Hour 14, and the last question on the examination would be, what did the cohort have that the boats did not, and what did it cost? The answer, which every Ascendancy navigator has written for 40 years since, is everything and everything. Call took the first Ascendancy hull through under pilotage 11 months after the compact. It was a freighter, ugly and slow, and he had asked for it specially. The pilot boat met him at the marker. She came aboard alone, unarmed, in a coverall with a smear of grease on the cheekbone, and she was 20 years old now and had a license in her pocket that had been early by 4 months, and she stopped at the top of the ramp because Call was standing there waiting for her, and for a second neither of them said anything. Then he handed her a printed page. She unfolded it. It was an itemized statement, 11 months old with a 0 at the bottom. You kept it, she said. I read it 400 times, said Thavan Call. I never worked out how to argue with it. It's not an argument. Isa Verren folded the page and handed it back. It's just the bill. He took her to the bridge. 12 Vessarine turned to look at her, all of them twice her size, all of them older, one of them a helmsman with 60 years in his hands, and none of them said a word, because the standing order of every hull in that arm now read that at the marker the pilot speaks and the ship listens. She looked around the bridge. She looked at the screens full of a system she had heard every night of her life through 11 centimeters of hab wall. All right, she said, turn off the chart, it's already wrong. The helmsman turned off the chart. Now listen, said the pilot, and put her cheek against the hull, and took 11,000 tons of the Vessarine Ascendancy home through the scatter on account nobody else in the arm could hear, and did not scratch the paint.